Make sure you talk loud.
True. Okay, hi everyone. I'm glad that you guys could make it and that you could tune into our Zoom meeting. We're happy to have author Erin Bartels here with us today to talk about her book, All That We Carried. We're super excited to have her. We're grateful that she could join us, and we're grateful that you guys could hop on here too. So we're going to start out with a little bit of Q&A and just getting to know each other, and then we're going to go into some of Erin's hiking travels and different things. I apologize if you can't hear me that well. Without further ado, I'll turn things over to Erin.
Yes, I'm not in a coffee shop, so actually I'm really jealous that you are in a coffee shop because there's still nowhere around here that is open so to sit in, and I've been really missing that, especially the other day when my internet went out. I'm Erin, and it's really fun for me to be able to talk to all of you and anybody who's watching this later. It's being recorded so that you can take a look, and if you have any questions that I don't answer in this time frame, I will be looking at the Facebook page in a couple days, and if there are any questions that you want to put in the comments under the video, I'll try to answer those as well. It's really fun for me to have you guys read All That We Carried as your first 2021 book club book. It's hopefully a book that will start your year off right. I know that there's a lot of bickering in it, which, you know, we're all very used to, but hopefully we can use that as a springboard to find reconciliation and harmony later. And I thought I'd tell you a little bit about the background of why I wrote the book, a little bit about my own experiences hiking with my sister, and I have some photographs to show you as well. I'm going to share my screen in a little bit, and then you'll be able to see some pictures from my actual hiking trips with my actual sister. And I know that not everybody is from this area that's in the book club, so I'll talk a little bit about Michigan and how amazing it is. And it's January now. It was 4 degrees this morning, but that's all right. It's beautiful and sunny today, which is really important to those of us who live in cloudy areas. So this is great. All That We Carried is my third book with Ravel. My first couple came out in 2019, kind of the beginning and the end of 2019. And I'll talk a little bit about those later too if people want to know about them. Just let me know in the chat if you do. But this is a book that I wrote to kind of celebrate sisterhood, even though a lot of the times with a sister you don't always get along, but to talk about sisterhood in a way that was, at least in my experience, realistic, because my own sister and I didn't always get along. And she actually is in the discussion group, although she's not able to watch this today, so she'll probably watch it later, so I need to be careful what I say. But we didn't always get along. And in our late 20s, we started, well, I guess we might have been even our 30s, we started hiking together. And it was something that we could both do. We both really like being out in the woods. We both really like being away from family and just having time to talk to each other. Most of the time, once you're adults and you're married and have kids, when you get together with your family or your friends, you're also still a parent. You're still a child of your parents. If they're there, you're still a brother or a sister to whoever's there. You got your husband there, and you have to manage all of these relationships and all of these conversations. And it's really nice to get away from that sometimes. So we've spent a lot of time on different trails in Michigan, in the woods, on the beach, in mountainous areas, in really flat areas, different seasons. And even though we don't talk a lot on the trail, it's mostly trudging and making sure you don't trip on stuff. And and it's a lot of hard work, especially when you're not in shape like we aren't. And so you have a lot of time to think and some time to talk about things that maybe you wouldn't say in front of all those people that you're trying to get away from. My sister's eldest daughter a few years back was sort of intimating that she might want to come along with us. And I'm like, oh no, she's not invited. Nobody is invited. It's just us. So I knew that I wanted to write a book at some point about hiking and about sisters. And our second to last hiking trip sort of ended before it was supposed to because of various things, mostly mosquitoes. And we ended up hitchhiking with a lady back to our car, which was 25 miles away. And during this conversation is when it kind of solidified in my mind, like, oh, this person's interesting. She would make an interesting character. And so I was quickly writing notes about her as we were driving back to the car. And I think right then is when I definitely knew I'm going to write a story about hiking. So that's kind of how this book came to be. And I would love to show you guys some pictures. So I'm going to share my screen for a little bit. I wanted to show you some pictures from my hikes and talk about some of the places that we've gone and some of the experiences that we've had, because they inform the book, and you've all read the book, so I'm not giving anything away here. But I thought you might want to see some of the real life places that are in the book. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I'm going to pull up this PowerPoint. Okay, can everybody see that? Okay, so it starts out, that's not even the first picture. Here we go. Our very first hiking trip in the backcountry was at Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore, which is on the south shore of Lake Superior. So if you know anything about Michigan or Michiganders, you know that we like to make maps with our hands. So this is where I am right now. I'm in Lansing, way down here. And my colleagues, Brianne and Anne, are over here in the Grand Rapids area. My sister lives up here in Traverse City, and we go over the bridge way up here to hike our first hike. And this was, I think, in 2012. And it was the end of June, beginning of July. And so it's a beautiful summertime. And Lake Superior, if you don't know, is the best of the Great Lakes, which is why it's called Superior. And there are these fantastic sandstone cliff formations all along it. And the hike up there takes you very close to the edge and all the way to the edge on some of these. And occasionally the cliffs collapse. The year that we were up there, there was a volunteer group cutting a new trail because one of the cliffs had collapsed and the trail was on it. Thankfully, nobody got hurt. This is my sister Allison that year. And most of the pictures of us will be of her because I'm the one with the camera. You know, everybody has a phone now with a camera, but I am somebody who loves taking pictures with good cameras. And so I will be the one behind the camera most of the time. One of our favorite places on that hike is a place called Mosquito Beach, which doesn't sound nice at all, but it is gorgeous. You can see these great sandstone layers of beach. So it's really rock that you're walking on, but it's all made of sand. And in the distance there, where the land juts out, you'll see sea caves. And when the lake is really high, you won't see those, but when it's lower, like it was in 2012, you will. Probably if you went there today, you probably wouldn't see them because the lake levels are so high right now. But you can actually hike out there and go into those sea caves. And people also do a lot of kayaking in that area to get up close. And when we were children, we went on a Pictured Rocks cruise. It was like an hour long. It's not like a cruise, like a trip. But it was something that we did as children, and you can see all the amazing formations along the lakeshore. And I took my son on the same thing a few years back when we did an Upper Peninsula road trip. So there's Allison again. She's, I think this is possibly Chapel Beach. And there are lots of beaches and lots of just gorgeous rivers and waterfalls and everything along the way. This is Mosquito Beach again. And it's just, there's no people. Every once in a while you get to places where there are more people because they're easier to hike in for day hikes. But when you're doing backcountry hikes, it's nice that usually you don't run into a lot of people. The next year we went to the other end of that same lakeshore to Grand Sable Dunes. Grand Sable Dunes is a very different type of landscape. So this is up on top of the dunes, and we had a campsite the first night where you kind of went up a hill in this really densely wooded area, and then you kind of saw a parting. It was like you were going into Narnia, and then you came upon the top of these dunes, and it was just you could see forever. It was amazing. And I was really surprised by it. I wasn't really expecting to see that kind of landscape when I went up there. So we spent a lot of time on the dunes, trying really hard to mark the place where we came up, because you got to find your way back down again. And there's a lot of places you could get lost up there. There's no trails. But it was a beautiful place. Anybody who lives in Michigan just loves the beaches. And but this is the dunes. So you can see they're quite substantial, many, many miles long. And all those green things are trees and forests. And if you go down the dunes, it takes about 10 minutes to get to the bottom and about 3 hours to climb back up. So we did not go down the dunes because we were doing enough walking. But it's a lot like Sleeping Bear Dunes, which is near where my sister lives, where you can go down these dunes at just this back-breaking speed and tumble head over heels because of the height and the angle. And it'll take you forever to get back up because every step you take into sand is about half a step back. So this might block, if you have a screen where you've got my little face on the side there, you might need to move the box where there's people. This is my sister and I up on top of the dunes. So you can see just how far up we are. It was just such a beautiful trip. And at night we went back up to get sunset pictures. And along the way you also run across what's on the right there is part of the Graveyard Coast. Now, one of the things about Lake Superior and the Great Lakes in general, but especially Lake Superior, is that it's a very dangerous lake for shipping and boating, especially during October, November, those months. And there are lots and lots and lots of shipwrecks. And this is part of a shipwreck. And there's a whole bunch of them along the Graveyard Coast, hence the name. And this is a lighthouse there at I think it's called Grand Sable Lighthouse or Ausable Lighthouse, perhaps. There's an Ausable River, but it has nothing to do with that. It's just named after the same thing, I think. But we weren't really interested in lighthouses, so we just kept going. The next year, we went to Tequamanon Falls, which is also in the Upper Peninsula, a little bit further east. And it was September. And so it was a very different type of trip. It wasn't the summertime. It was getting colder. There was a little bit of color. And Tequamanon Falls is a series of falls. This is the Big Falls. This is, I think, 48 feet, a 48-foot drop. And that's the sort of big feature. And I didn't run into anybody who'd ever hiked there. So I thought, well, they have trails. Let's hike there anyway. And it was a really beautiful hike, but it was a little unnerving because we never passed any other hikers. And that is when you start thinking about all the things that can go wrong, and about how your cell phone doesn't work up there, and about how long would it take me to find somebody if, like, one of us broke our ankle. How are we getting out of here? So there was a little unnerving. There were also a lot of berries that time of year, and you start thinking about bears and them getting ready for winter, and every little sound you hear sounds like it's got to be a bear when really it's a chipmunk. But we really enjoyed that trip as well, despite the fact that it got really sloppy. And if you've read the book, you know that that was one of the problems that these girls had. The trail got nasty and they kept leaving it. This is a bridge that somebody formed here. You can see there's 4 slim sapling type trees or branches across this goopy mess. And the thing about most Michigan trails, especially ones that are run by the state rather than the federal government, they're not necessarily hiker friendly. They're not groomed a lot. So it's not like people are like, oh, this is always wet every year. Let's build a real bridge. Nope. You are going to have to hike across that somehow. And the interesting thing about the Tequamanon hike was that a lot of the trail had been groomed, but not by people. It was groomed by beavers, and not so that it was good for hikers. And before I go to the next slide, you can see the top right, there's that big tree with the blue dot, and that is the North Country Trail marker that they were looking for and lost. But it was very wet. This is a wetland created by a beaver, and we know it was created by a beaver because we found his dams. these pictures on the right, my sister is about a foot below where the water level is. So not only do beavers dam across rivers to stop the flow, this one also decided where he wanted his pond to end. And so he had built up this edge. And the photo on the left shows one of our trees that has the blue blaze, where it is now in his pond, rather than, I mean, that's where the trail should be. So you got to figure out your way around some of these things. And there are lots of obstacles. This is from a hike on a very easy hike called the Jordan River Pathway, which is in the Lower Peninsula. But there's always trees and all sorts of things that fall across the trails during the spring thaw, and sometimes they don't move them at all. Sometimes you'll see that people have come out with chainsaws and worked on the trails a bit, but there are also occasionally stairs, which is nice. And on a hike like Jordan River, there's not a lot of scenery. You're in the woods most of the time, so you're looking at smaller things like wild columbine and little tiny butterflies and things like that, and beautiful flowers. I guess this was a summer hike because we've got some Queen Anne's lace out there and some asters. So it was probably late summer. I can't believe that I don't remember. But we also looked for a lot of mushrooms, just like these, like Olivia and Melanie did when they were hiking. And we found so many mushrooms. In the late summer is when you find the mushrooms. So you kind of need to look down sometimes and see what's interesting down there if everything else is just trees. And that's an Indian pipe flower there on the left, which is so much fun to find because they only grow in very particular soils. So if you ever see one, don't take it home because it will die. And I wanted to show you that there are some things that are annoying about hiking that I put into the book that are from real life. So there's one of those stupid flossers that I see in every parking lot and saw in the Jordan River Pathway trail. And that is the very fire ring where we found live embers going after somebody had left their campsite. So definitely some of the issues that the girls run into are things that we've done in real life. One of my favorite hikes that we ever took was in October. It was very cold. The first night was 35 degrees, and it was in the Manistee River Valley, which was a beautiful place to hike. It had lots of gorgeous little gullies and rivers and creeks and beautiful trees, beautiful color, because October is, of course, the most beautiful month in the world. And this was our first night, our first campsite. And this is where the bear thing happened. So the part in the book where the bear comes by and sleeps next to the tent, and there's the screaming fox earlier in the night, that's all directly from personal experience. And this was the site. And the next morning, those were some of the scratch marks in the sand, in the dirt outside the tent, where we slept next to probably a young bear. But we had some beautiful views, beautiful color, just gorgeous foggy mornings, and it was just enchanting. So even though hiking is a lot of hard work, and every once in a while, there's always a point on the trail where you're like, why am I doing this? Why would I do this to myself? It's got its own rewards as well. So we just had a beautiful hike there and just gorgeous weather. And then last year we popped up to Sleeping Bear Dunes and Empire Bluffs, where you're on Lake Michigan. And we had a couple day hikes. We decided we weren't up for overnight hikes that year, and we didn't do them. We did at one point start a trip in the Porcupine Mountains, which I mentioned we kind of cut short. And so I'll talk a little bit about why we cut that short if you want to hear about it, but I wanted to get to one of these pictures here. Okay, here we go. So every trip we take a little selfie with, actually those top ones might be from the same trip, who knows, with our gear, or we've got our shirts on there at the bottom, Everything Hurts and I'm Dying, which I bought specifically for us for these trips. And anytime we pass the 45th parallel, we like to take a picture of the sign. And so it's just something that we have so much fun doing, and neither of us really smiles all that much in real life. We usually look like we're not very friendly, but you can tell that we're just really happy to be there. And my sister does eat SpaghettiOs cold out of a can on hiking trips, and it's disgusting. So I had to put that in the book. And this is the Lake of the Clouds, which is in the Porcupine Mountains. This was the beginning of our personal hiking trip rather than the end. And it didn't go well. There were plague level mosquitoes out. And when we had a chance the second day to hike out or else be stuck doing it for 3 more days, we kind of looked at each other and said, well, why do we do this? Why do we hike? Do we hike to say we've done it? Do we hike because we want the exercise? No, we hike to have fun, and we are not having any fun. And so we made the decision to trust that we would get picked up by somebody nice and not a serial killer. And we got lucky. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now. And I'm hoping that I can answer some questions. I think that I actually looked in on the discussions that you were having this month. I was lurking, I didn't say anything, but I was lurking and seeing what you guys thought of different things and how you were answering the different questions. And it was really fun to see everybody's interaction with the material and how some people really connect with one sister versus another. I think that I was doing a book club thing yesterday, and the woman asked the book club members, you know, who's an Olivia? And several people kind of like nobody wants to admit to being the Olivia, but there were more Olivias there than Melanies. So in my relationship with my sister, you know, she's the older sister, and there's a lot of things that she recognized in Olivia in herself. But to me, when I was writing the book, both of those sisters were me, just at different times of life. When I was younger, I was 100% Melanie. I would just sort of not listen when people were talking. My father would send me to go get a tool, and I would never come back. I, you know, would say, yes, I'll do something, and I wouldn't have listened at all to the directive. And an hour later, I would be asked, what are you doing? You're supposed to be cleaning your room. Oh, well, I didn't know that. Well, you said you were going to clean your room. So I was definitely a Melanie growing up. But I think that in a lot of ways, I'm a lot like Olivia now. I'm definitely the one who plans all of our hiking trips. And, but my sister does adhere to the lists much better than Melanie ever did. So I would love to hear just your general thoughts on what you liked about the book or what you didn't like about the book. How you felt about the ending. Some people don't like that it's not tied up as nicely as they want it to be, and I'm fine with that. Or if you wanted to ask me any questions about writing or about what's coming next or about my other books or anything like that. Somebody has said, how was the idea for this book born? I think it was just from my own experience growing up with a sister who was very close in age and with whom I had a lot of run-ins over the years. I think that we were fine until maybe junior high. And then when I got into high school, and she was also in high school, it was really bad because everything I did apparently reflected poorly on her. She didn't like the way I carried my books. She didn't like it if like her friends had a problem with me, and I didn't care. And we ended up having a lot of friends in the same grade, which I don't think she liked either. But when we went off to college, and we kind of avoided each other because whenever we got together, we got on each other's nerves. And sometime in our 20s, we realized, you know, we're a lot more similar than we expected or than we thought. And now we're really, really good friends. And if you had told either of us that in high school, we would have laughed you out of the room. But I'm really glad that we're close now. And that's kind of the hope that I have for Olivia and Melanie, that they'll be able to get over their differences and become close, like for real close, not just tolerating each other close. how did you get the idea for the character of Josh? I'd like to hear what you guys think of Josh. I guess that was one of the questions that you answered. Some people thought he was maybe an angel. Some people thought he was a representation of Christ. Some people thought that he was just a really nice guy. One person in the group that I was talking to last night thought that he was their father, like reincarnated. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. That never occurred to me. But I wanted it to be, these two are not going to reconcile their differences on their own. So they needed an outside person to push them a little bit. Normally, I think for siblings, that would be your parents in a lot of ways. And they don't have their parents anymore telling them, you need to be nice to each other. You need to get along. You need to support each other. And so Josh became a character to help them start analyzing and thinking deeply about what they really thought and how they were treating each other and what the other one might be feeling. And I wrote him very purposefully as a Christ figure. He's not necessarily Jesus himself, like in some human form, but he's certainly in the narrative, he's a Christ figure. And there are a lot of ways in which he does that. The way that he has the bread and the fish, and he has enough, and he will share even though he doesn't have a lot. The fact that he gives them a compass and talks about how you can't carry these burdens for other people, and you can't even carry your own burden. So there's a lot of ways in which he functions as a Christ figure, and especially at the end. And I felt the end was really obvious, but a lot of people don't. That, you know, it's not that Olivia or Melanie is looking for truth. Melanie feels like she's looking for something, but she believes a little bit of everything, and they can't all be true, just like Olivia says. And in my view, God comes looking for us, and he's the one who makes the first move. And that's kind of how I wanted to write Josh. How did you want the flashbacks of the Greens' childhood to function in the book? Also, you may drop your questions into the, oh, that's from Anne. Let's see. I didn't originally have the flashbacks in the book. And when my editor was reading over it, and then another editor, because my editor was on maternity leave for a while, both of them kind of wanted, they wanted more of the girl's background so that you could see, I think they wanted more scenes of the girls getting along. And in the end, most of those scenes, they have conflict in them, but they also have looking out for each other, or keeping each other's secrets, or something like that. And one of those scenes comes directly from my own childhood, the scene where they're at the cabin, and Melanie has taken the top bunk, and Olivia wants it and pulls her off the top of the bunk with her bear in her teeth, and she's going headfirst onto the floor, and Olivia puts her arm out and turns her over. That happened to me. I was the one falling off of the top bunk face first, because my sister was pulling me off of the top bunk face first. And then she did flip me on the way down so that I didn't crack my head open or break my neck. But to me, all of those sort of memories from childhood, and also sitting at the Christmas tree and trading presents, like, I know you got this, and I'll tell you if you tell me one of the things I got. We definitely did that. They're really sweet memories, even when there's a little bit of conflict, because you've got time past, and you can look back and see, like, even if you're not great friends with a sibling, they're always there when you're a kid. And they know more about you than most people, which is why they're so dangerous. Because they know all of your secrets, and they know all of the dumb things you've ever done. And that also makes them really great friends when you get along, because you can, laugh about those things. So the flashbacks, I was hoping once I wrote them, that they would show that, yeah, these girls have always had problems, but they didn't come out of nowhere. Certainly losing both of your parents in a tragic accident would make you possibly grieve in different ways. I'm a pastor's wife, and I'm sort of adjacent to a lot of grief, and some families do it really well and some people don't. And so those flashbacks show them also with their parents, and show them worrying about what their parents are going to think or getting in trouble with their parents. And you get a little bit more of that family connection even with the parents, even if they're not in the scene. And also the one with Olivia and Justin, you get a little bit of, oh, you can kind of see where even before this bad thing happened, they were drifting apart. And it was sad to both of them, but they knew it was going to happen. Let's see. You had so much great inspiration from this book from your own personal experiences. Did that make the book easy to write, or did you run into challenges writing along the way? That's a really good question. It was really easy to write, but there were definitely points at which it's a matter of having a little bit of courage to be honest. And if you're drawing a lot from your own life, and you know that people will be reading it who kind of know, then you have to be willing to say, you know, there are things that honesty is what makes a book good. I think it's what makes things feel real when somebody's being vulnerable and honest about things. But it's really easy to want to pull back as a writer. It's usually in the first draft, I'm extremely honest. And then in revisions, you kind of think, maybe that's too far. Maybe that's too much. And so it's trying to like power past those and say, no, it's fine. And I did tell my sister before the book came out, you know, we have different spiritual beliefs. We have had arguments about those sorts of things before. And I said, this is not about us. I want you to know I was already writing this before we had this conversation. It's not about me trying to write us into a particular place of, you know, I'm not trying to convince you of anything, you know, these sorts of things. But I knew she was going to read it, and I'm glad that she's had a good reaction to it. So anything that I've written, even if there's not an obvious connection to a real person in your life, I wish I could remember who said this. There was an author who said that don't worry about people seeing themselves in your writing. Everybody is going to think that they're the one you're writing about, but they never think it's the bad character. They always think they're the good characters. So you don't have to worry, which I thought was really funny. And nobody's ever come to me accusing me yet of, you know, using them or anything. But yeah, it was a little bit uncomfortable at times. And that would be the challenge, would be just to be honest and not equivocate and not step back, because then why bother writing? I loved the flashbacks, a great glimpse into their dynamic as sisters and their relationship at different points in their lives. Olivia and Justin's history together took me totally by surprise. Oh, I'm so glad. And that means that you didn't read any Goodreads reviews, because there's so many people who like, almost nothing happens in this book, right? I mean, it's a hike and a lot of stuff happens at the end, but you're just walking and having conversations. And there's not a lot of plot. And so to give away something like that, yeah, that irritates me when I read that. So I'm glad it took you by surprise. What do you want readers to take away from the book? Also, can you tell us about your other books and what you're working on now? Yes, absolutely. I hesitate to tell people what they should take away from reading a novel. I think that it depends on what you go in with. Somebody who goes into this novel who already has a Christian faith might take away a sort of recommendation to be reconciled to the people in your life who you're at odds with, and to not have to be right, but be willing to just have different opinions about things and still love each other. Somebody who comes to this who has no Christian background, I would hope that it would get them kind of asking some of those big questions about life and death and what happens after you die, and why does it matter what I believe about that. And there's all sorts of different things that you might just come away with, gosh, I'm really glad I don't hike because it sounds awful. Or you might come away with a desire to go buy some hiking gear and start on your little adventure. I hadn't thought about the fact that it actually does make hiking sound super awful, but somebody pointed that out in a different context, and I was like, oh, that's really strange because I really enjoy hiking. I don't, maybe deep down I do think it's awful. But yeah, I think that it really depends on what you come into it with. I certainly I didn't write this book and as apologetic. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of Christian readers who have certain expectations of Christian fiction are disappointed when they get to the end and there's not a definite Olivia is saved, or a definite even answer about how to be saved. But a novel is not an apologetic. It is a story. And this is the story of these two women in this point in their lives, and they're not ready for it yet. So that's why they didn't get saved at the end. Spoiler alert. So my first book with Revell came out January 2019, and it is We Hope for Better Things. And this was a 2020 Michigan Notable Book and a 2020 Women's Fiction Writers Association Award winner, Star Award, in both the general and the debut categories, which was quite great. For me, that's a group I've been involved in for a while, and I direct one of their retreats, and that was really exciting to me. But this is a story that is told in 3 timelines. It's the 1860s, 1960s, and present day Detroit, and a little bit north of Detroit. And it talks about interracial relationships. It talks about the Detroit race riots, the Civil War, the Underground Railroad, a lot of the current issues in the city of Detroit. And it's a look at how a family's legacy can change and how it just takes one person to make that turn for good or ill. So this is really great for anybody who is interested in historical fiction or social justice or anything like that. The Words Between Us was my second one that came out in September of 2019. And this is a story of a woman who owns a used bookstore in a town called River City, which is based on my hometown of Bay City. And she's hiding from a lot of things in her life, and she's going to get something in the mail that makes it clear to her that she can't hide anymore. Something from her past arrives, and she's going to need to deal with it. And it has a lot to do with forgiveness and I guess it has to do with the ways we assume we're right about things from what people have said or what we've read or anything like that. The things that haven't been said, and how many times we think we're right about something and actually we're very wrong about it because we just didn't ask the right questions, or we didn't ask any questions. We just made assumptions. So that is kind of the springboard for that book. And that book is told in 2 timelines as well. It's a now and a then. So now would be present day, and then is when the main character is about 14 years old. And what I'm working on now is, let's see, in 2022, in January, I'll have a book coming out with Revell that doesn't have an official title yet, so I'm not going to say what I think it should be. And that is a story of a novelist who, her first book was a very thinly veiled autobiographical account of abuse that she encountered as a younger person. And she gets a letter from a reader who accuses her of using people and getting it wrong in her book. And so she has decided that she needs to go up to the place where this happened, which is an inland lake in northern Michigan, where she spent every summer of her youth with her grandfather, who's passed away, and she now owns the cabin. She's going to go back up there and prove to herself that what she wrote was the truth, but it's going to turn out to be a lot more complicated than she thought. And then I'm also working right now on a 5th book that I've just sent a proposal in for, which is about musicians, and it's set in 1990, which is very fun. And it's about these 2 young musicians from very different backgrounds, and I'm not sure how much more I should say just yet. It's only half written, so who knows? Who knows if it will be exactly what I think it's going to be, but it's really fun to spend some time in that sort of transition between 1989 and 1990, which I remember as a child being an extremely hopeful time, and a time when anything seemed possible, and it seemed like the last 50 years of history were being turned on their heads, and just an amazing, hopeful time that began with the Berlin Wall coming down and the USSR crumbling, and ended with the beginning of the Gulf War. So it didn't last a long time, but it was really great when it lasted. So it's going to be set in a really hopeful time, and I think people are going to be ready for that sort of thing. And I'm really excited that by the time it comes out, we'll be able to do live events again, because I have so many fun ideas for the launch events. And I'm doing songwriting for it. We're going to be recording songs and maybe making a horrible 1990s style video. It's going to be great. So I'm really excited about that one. Let me see if I missed anything here. Oh, can we discuss the ending? I loved how the book wrapped up with Olivia and Melanie working toward a better relationship, but specifically that very last scene. How did everyone interpret that scene? Curious to hear your commentary as well. So I assume you're talking about the epilogue, where Olivia is 3 years later, and Olivia is at Twamanon Falls, which you saw some pictures of, and is taking a picture and kind of sees in the corner of the picture something strange, like, is that a person there? And then kind of, oh yeah, there is a person there, and that person looks really familiar. And she steps off of this man-made platform and decides to see what's out there. I'd love to hear other people's interpretations of that before I speak. You asked the question, Anne.
I'll unmute myself for a second. I thought, you know, in hindsight with this last scene, I was like, oh, I wonder if that's like somewhat symbolic. And I didn't know if it was. But I was like, if Josh is supposed to be like a Christ figure, if it was like her with her diagnosis, like finally kind of coming to like that end, like I didn't know, or if it was just like her internally like making a decision to just kind of pursue something else. So I didn't know, but it was a nice ending.
Other theories? Nobody wants to share? It's interesting to me, when I wrote that, I felt like it was, actually when I wrote this entire book, it's definitely the most religious or Christian or spiritual of my 3 books. And it's gotten, I think, the most criticism for not being like enough. I don't know. So it's a little strange to me, the things that I felt when I was writing, like, this is too obvious, I need to make this less obvious, how it's really not obvious. So you're not alone. When I wrote that scene, to me, that was that, you know, earlier on when she encounters Josh, and you have a span of a week in which most of the story takes place. So you really can't have people change too much. And if we start with them at each other's throats, and neither of them is, one of them's believing everything, one of them's believing nothing, you can't necessarily get them all the way to where some people want them to be by the end of a book, because it's only a week, which is why I don't have Olivia actually forgive Justin. She can kind of start down that road, but is it realistic that all of a sudden, okay, I'll forgive him? No. The same thing happens, I think, with faith. Some people will have an instant moment of before and after. Other people, it takes a lot longer, and it's really hard to say the moment you believe. When I was growing up, I grew up in the Lutheran church. I always went to church. I was baptized as a baby. I went through confirmation class. I went through confirmation. I believed what I was saying at that time. My sister did the same thing and never really believed. So for us, even though we went through the same upbringing and we both went through confirmation class, we had different paths already that we were taking. And I don't know when I started believing. And I've certainly had doubts about various things over the years, which is where I think a lot of Melanie or Olivia's thoughts come from. You know, those kind of thoughts where you're like, gosh, it would really be easier in this moment in life if none of this were true. Or it would really be easier if I could just agree with this person about that being true. And how closely do you stick to your convictions, and how much do you allow yourself to think like, I might be wrong about this part of it, and grow. And for Olivia, I saw her as somebody who, I mean, it would take time, even if you did connect the dots about how, oh my gosh, the only reason I'm alive today is because of all this terrible stuff that happened on this trip. Because if I hadn't had that injury, I wouldn't have gone to the hospital and I wouldn't have gotten a diagnosis, and I probably would be dead. Even when somebody has an experience like that, they can usually either repress that thought and push it to the back of their minds, or they can explain it away with something else. You can just believe that random things happen and coincidence and all that. And I think it would take somebody like Olivia a while to come to the point where, all right, it seems crazy, but I'm going to take a step here and just see if there's any truth to this. And so to me, the last step, or the last scene in the book was, Josh had already found her, and he comes and goes in their story a lot of the same way that God kind of interferes or interjects into our story, and then kind of feels like he's gone for a while, and then it really feels like he's present. And at the end, to me, she's taking that step that he's drawing her, just like God draws us and draws our hearts. He's drawing her to himself. And at some point, yeah, maybe she will believe. But I wasn't thinking of it like in terms of she has this diagnosis and she's stepping off and like into eternity or anything like that. So it's really funny that you mentioned that. And that's the fun thing about a book. Once it's finished and it's in the hands of readers, that's theirs to interpret. And definitely the group I talked to last night, which was a group that was mixed between people who were, part of the church and people who weren't, they had very different interpretations of the end. So that's a good question. Oh yeah. I thought it was Olivia finally being willing to let go of her desire to control everything. And that too, Vicki, that is definitely something that, like, there's not one meaning, right, to a scene or to even a small detail in a book. There can be multiple meanings, and certainly that is something that she needed to learn. Like, I can't carry around this pain anymore. I can't carry around all of my my need to be in control all the time. And yeah, for her to leave the man-made platform and just say, all right, even though this is the hard way or the narrow way, this is the way that I'm going to try, because the way I've been going has not been satisfying. So yeah. Did anybody else have any questions that they wanted to add? This has been great discussion.
We'll open it up for a couple more questions if people have them, and then I think we'll start to just wrap things up.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So at the bottom there, Anne has put in some information about where you can find me online if you wanted to connect or to follow. My website has a number of things on it that might be of interest. I do put my events there. Some events that we're doing now, virtual events, are open to anybody, things through libraries and things like that. And I believe, hopefully starting in the summer, start scheduling some in-person events. And certainly when the next book comes out, I would love to have you guys experience, I don't know if we'll do like in-person events that have virtual as well. I don't know, maybe we'll do both. It's a brave new world. And I am on Facebook. You can get author news there, and I share interviews sometimes there and reviews. Twitter, most of my audience I don't think is on Twitter, but other writers are, so that's why I'm on Twitter. But the place I spend the most time and are probably the most personal is Instagram. So if you wanted to follow me on Instagram, that's the, I think, most fun place because there's lots of pictures and I love taking pictures. So sometimes you can see my dog being naughty and sometimes you can see, you know, beautiful garden stuff in the right season, not right now, but stuff like that. So I would be happy to connect with you in any of those places. And if you find me on Facebook and it's something other than Erin Bartels author, that's a personal page, and just find the author page because personal page is just for me and close personal friends. So.
Well, if that's everything, I think we're gonna start to wrap this up. Well, thank you, Erin, for coming and joining.
Thanks a lot for having me, and thank you guys for reading the book and for all the discussion over the past couple of weeks and stuff like that. It was really fun.
Yeah, we really appreciate your participation. And then for everyone else who joined us today, thanks for hopping on here, guys. This video will be posted to the Facebook page for other people to watch once this is done. But have a good weekend, everyone.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye. Thanks,
Bye.
Erin.